Before I begin this presentation, I'm very excited to announce that the Heretic Sisters will be reuniting for a show to analyze Trump and Putin's human design charts. So stay tuned. In my last video about the connection between Donald Trump and Elon Musk, which I'll link below this video, I mentioned wanting to dive deeper into the rise of the religious right, especially as it related to the prophecies I grew up with in the evangelical faith. This prophecy was specifically interesting to me as it spoke to an antichrist that everyone would be mesmerized by, who would usher in the mark of the beast. The mark of the beast has been described in various narratives like the popular series Left Behind as a microchip that is placed underneath your skin to identify you. It sounds eerily similar to facial recognition, eye scanning, or more seriously, Neuralink's microchip. It also speaks to the collapse of our currency and the creation of a new world order that would herald in a new world digital currency. If you've been paying attention to politics lately, this all sounds like what this new administration is attempting to manifest in real time. If you've been paying attention to this prophecy, you might think that the religious right sold themselves to the devil. But the religious right instead distracted their followers with claims that Obama was the devil and Trump was their savior. The collusion of the technologists, the self-proclaimed rationalists, was a bit surprising to me, to be honest, until I noticed that Peter Thiel was actively promoting a return or reutilization of the religious prophecies of the Antichrist. In my understanding of his point of view, since we are largely mimetic creatures, it's one suggestion to motivate human behavior toward innovation and peace, aka how to control the masses 101, toward your vision of the future. Leading by fear has always been a strong motivator that organized religions have used to both recruit and control their followers. It has been specifically weaponized by the Christian right to sway their followers' political stances in the United States. But this strategy is certainly not exclusive to the Christian right. All extreme fundamentalists operate this way. This type of brainwashing has worked spectacularly generation after generation, especially when people are born into it. Support systems are set up in such a way that it's not so easy to extract yourself. This is exactly the kind of structure the United States government is trying to put into place nationally. So how did we get here? In this video, I'm going to explore some of the main players and origins of the Christian right through the lens of human design. I want to attempt to wrap my head around this movement and how they rose to power within the US government, joining forces with Donald Trump and the tech industry to completely revamp the United States government via Project 2025. I'm going to start with some of the people and movements that were on my radar growing up, like Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell, and even the John Birch Society, which tried to recruit rebellious teenagers like me growing up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. There have been more legitimate political operatives and think tanks that have shaped governmental policy since the 1970s. I'm going to look at those too. Before I dive deeply into each of these charts, I want to take a step back and remind us that we're entering new cycles and Pluto is coming to the end of the wheel. And so all of the things that we're experiencing right now is change. And a lot of these charts demonstrate change, and people start to grasp onto things that make them feel safe, like religion. And they're easily manipulated during these times because people don't like change. They don't know what's going to happen next. And so we all are vulnerable to other people manipulating us. Conspiracy theories have been rampant during this time, especially in the United States. As people have been vying for power, they repeat the same cycles that they've seen that have worked, which seeding all of these conspiracy theories because there's real anger out there. So people believe in conspiracy theories like the Illuminati that talks about this cabal of bankers that are getting together and colluding with each other, or They're talking about the tech elite. They're getting together and colluding with each other because there's part of that that's true. We're angry at people who are in power who are giving us an unfair deal, or that's what we think, or leading us in a direction that we don't want to go because we have certain values and we are identified with those values. It's about hierarchical power structures. So the people that are in power decide that they're going to condition us with something, so we'll go a certain direction. We're in a very mutable, energetic time. Pluto has gone into Aquarius. It's a fixed sign, but it's making a channel with a Pisces gate. It's drawing out that energy. Neptune is at the last degrees of Pisces still, even though it's already transitioned into a gate that's about Aries. It's still kind of in that transitional period. And we've got the nodes in Pisces and we've got Saturn in Pisces, and that's in gate 36, which is about crisis. We're seeing some resurgence of this religious right business where people want our country to go to a fundamentalist place. I don't think the cycles say that we're going to get there, but we're going to have a lot of struggles, religious wars around where we're headed. Right now, we're in this transition. So people are very scared and they're grasping on to these leaders who are manipulating them for their own purposes. And I saw a lot of mutable energy in these charts, but also I saw 4-6 profiles. It's all about people who are self-absorbed, but also have that connection to the 6th line, which is transpersonal. So they're highly influential. And they're leading us into these cycles of change. Also, some 1-3s in there and 3-5s to shake us up because we're in that Uranus part of the Pluto cycle right now. But I hope that this gives you some context. I also want to say that I'm here for a very specific reason. I'm here talking about this because I've been conditioned in such a way. My chart is positioned in such a way that makes me interested in this subject and speaking out about it. I am an Aquarius. My sun is in the gate of revolution. I was born and brought up in a very conservative evangelical house. My south node is in Gemini in gate 16. And I have my Mercury, which is the ruler of my south node, in gate 13, line 2. And I did not agree with the ways that the religious right was treating other people. My family is from the deep south. I was not on board with all of the racism that I saw in my extended family. I went to Georgia when I was in the 3rd grade in the 80s, and it was still segregated during that time. That didn't sit right with me. I moved. I went to New York City. I was in the tech industry. I was in marketing. So I've seen a lot that has brought me here today to want to share this information with you. We all have our role to play. What role is yours? Okay, I'm going to get off my soapbox and start this presentation. Now, I want to go through these chronologically. So let's start with Bob Welch. He was born on December 1st, 1899. He founded the John Birch Society, the one that tried to recruit me when I was a teenager. I don't have the exact time of births for many of these people, but for some of them, their chart doesn't change that much. He's one of those people. He's most likely a 4-6. And like I said, there's a pattern that I see with 4-6 profiles. He was born on the cross of planning. This cross is about bringing together others for the common pursuit of focus. So he's mostly Sagittarius and Gemini energy. You see all of those hanging gates off of his undefined throat. This is a guy who is talkative, always trying to get attention. And he's a self-proclaimed pushy converter to his fundamentalist Baptist faith. He said his friends called him insufferable. And he was always into conspiracy theories ever since he was a young boy, but he became obsessed with communism as he grew older. He became wealthy from selling candy at his brother's candy store, if you recognize the Welch name. He's an idea man, an influencer. He can be very opinionated and also a very aggressive salesperson. Now, his nodes are in the opposite direction of Trump's, with Neptune next to his south node in Gemini in the gate of tribal leadership of the material way, and Mercury, Mars, and Saturn in gate 26. This is the gate of the great egoist or salesperson. He's just a natural salesperson. He has so much energy there. That was his gift. And that's how he helped his brother become rich, because he was such a great salesperson. North Node is in the line of censorship, the use of selective memory to maintain the status quo. This is what Ra says about the gate 26. The whole thing about the 26 is it's rooted in this manipulation of memory. You have to see that the dream is actually where they get their power. It's the dream that has the power. You can't sell to the tribe without a dream. You can't sell them anything. You can't sell them oranges. You can't sell them awakeness. You can't sell them anything unless it's a dream. So out of the 26th gate comes the great gate of hustlers. And design Jupiter is in gate 28, the line of treachery, which is about abuse of trust or manipulating the masses by pitting one faction against the other. This is the ruler of his North Node. Bob Welch started the John Birch Society during his second Saturn return. Now remember, Saturn is in gate 26. John Birch Society is described like this. It's an American right-wing political advocacy group. It was founded in 1958. It is anti-communist, supports social conservatism, and is associated with ultra-conservative, radical right-wing populist, and right-wing libertarian ideas. It peaked in the 1970s, but it started to make a resurgence during the Obama administration, and then again in 2020. Some have argued that JBS and its beliefs shaped the Republican Party, the Christian right, and the Trump administration. The society opposes one world government, the United Nations, and free trade. It argues that the U.S. Constitution has been devalued in favor of political and economic globalization. Its publication, The New American, has described what it sees as an American moral decline, threats to the family, including abortion, birth control, divorce, drugs, homosexuality, crime, violence, secular humanism, teenage pregnancy, teen suicide, environmentalism, feminism, and pornography. That's quite a list. The JBS has alleged that moral degeneracy is perpetrated by a conspiracy to make the United States vulnerable to internationalism. Now, it's funny because when I was recruited, they didn't talk about any of this conservatism. They come out with, well, the government is trying to tell you what to do, but you have your own autonomy, and we don't want this big cabal of people controlling us who make a lot of money. On the other hand, he has made a lot of money in his businesses. And so it's basically pitting one against the other. He's making these reasonings that it's globalization that has caused all these problems, when in fact, it could be capitalism. So that's what I find so fascinating with all of these movements. He was against communism, was much more inclined to support big business. Now, this organization was started on the cross of rulership when the Sun, Saturn, and Mercury was on his North Node. Now, it is said he maintained tight control of this organization. Even as he branched out into national, local chapters, he maintained very tight control. There was a lot of energy in Gate 59. Pluto, Mercury, Venus, and the moon was there. This is the gate of seduction. So he had a lot of access to seductive powers when he started this organization. And Neptune was conjunct his design Jupiter, which makes this chart very powerful, as we've seen it play out in influencing the right even so many years later. Because, like I said, Jupiter had the risk-taking of seduction and manipulation of the masses. Now we come to Lewis Powell, who wrote the Powell referendum. He was an American lawyer and jurist who served as an associate justice of the Supreme Court of the United States between 1972 and 1987. He served as a corporate lawyer for the tobacco industry. I think that's important to understand his frame of reference. He was also a 4-6 profile. He was born on September 19th, 1907, on the right angle cross of Eden. This is the same cross as Trump. It's just in a different quarter. Now, this is what Ross says about the fourth line in this quarter. You can see the fourth line through this quarter that all of the dark side of the fourth line is coming out. The brotherhood, sisterhood works really nice in all of the other quarters. It's really nice there. But when it comes here, no. Because when it comes here, you get to the core. Think about the relationship between the 1 and the 4. The 1 is the foundation. The 4 is what delivers the foundation. We think of the 1 as being authoritarian, but only because of its lower trigram, self-absorption, beginning of the process, do we see or feel that authoritarianism as something that is almost crude. It's just a natural byproduct. And you see that in Trump. He was born on a 1-3 profile. But the 4 is the true authoritarian. They've mastered how to hide that one authority under a brotherhood, sisterhood mask of being your friendly advisor. Now, this line is called triumph, a position of natural and unchallengeable power. Now, he's got the channel of judgment as his only defined channel. He's what you call a splenic projector. And his Mercury is in gate 18 in the line of the zealot, the energetic obsession to clean house. And his Uranus is in gate 58. And this line is about getting carried away. So he's got this energy that gets carried away in rebellion to clean house. So you can see this coming out in this memo that he's created that has survived so long. He's got this energy to clean house and to make a change that he sees is wrong. And Elon has this channel. And if you understand when this was written, this Powell referendum we'll go into in a minute, you can understand how he relates so well to this memo. He's got Saturn opposing his sun. Saturn is in gate 36, the gate of crisis, and his sun is in the gate of conflict. So he's here trying to get control over what he sees is a crisis. Neptune has been traveling in gate 36 for a very long time, the last couple of years, and now Saturn is there once again, and the North Node. So we've got this energy right now in the collective about, oh my God, we've got to fix something. We got to take control of this crisis that we're in. And he's got Pluto in gate 12 with his designed sun. He's used to dealing with power and conflict and fixing what he sees is wrong in the world. And this is what is motivating this memo, which we'll talk about now. We come to the Powell referendum, which was written in 1971. It was the year before he joined the Supreme Court. So that memo was probably what got him there. He wrote this based in part on Powell's reaction to the work of activist Ralph Nader, whose 1965 expose on General Motors, unsafe at any speed, put a focus on the auto industry, putting profit ahead of safety, which triggered the American consumer movement. Powell saw it as an undermining of power of private business and a step towards socialism. Remember, he was a lawyer for the tobacco industry. The memo called for corporate America to become more aggressive in molding society's thinking about business, government, politics, and law in the U.S. The Powell Memorandum ultimately came to be a blueprint for the rise of the American conservative movement and the formation of a network of influential right-wing think tanks and lobbying organizations, such as the Heritage Foundation. Powell argued, the most disquieting voices joining the chorus of criticism come from the perfectly respectable elements of society, from the college campus, the pulpit, the media, the intellectual and literary journals, the arts and sciences, and from politicians. Powell urged conservatives to undertake a sustained media outreach program, including funding neoliberal scholars, publishing books, papers, popular magazines, and scholarly journals, and influencing public opinion. The memo was written on the day of the cross of industry. You can't make this stuff up. And it's about confusion where momentum outstrips awareness. Ra describes it like this: to be confused is to be confused by the fact that you're constantly being impacted by the other, that you can't find another that is right for you. And eventually what you do is that a part of you disengages completely from the other, just deals with the movement, just deals with the phenomenon, and cuts itself off in its aloofness from connecting. So I see this other as describing the consumer versus bigger companies and how it became this machine of influence. So we're not dealing with, okay, well, let's solve problems that the consumer is facing, or let's understand what the corporations are going through. It's basically, let's talk about ideologies to influence opinions about it. I want to highlight that this memo was written the year Elon was born. If you remember his chart, you'll notice that there's the pattern here of North Node in gate 13, line 2, meaning empathy can only be for a select few, for the corporations in this case. And Mars is very close to the North Node. It's in the same gate in this chart, but in line 1, which in the negative expression is the politician kissing babies. So it's basically fake empathy, politician style. And it's highlighting the fact that this memo decisively positions big business over the consumer. Again, the direction is from democracy to something more akin to fascism, or what we're labeling fascism right now. And it's very interesting to note that Elon's rage with the system seemed to also have happened with his struggles running Tesla, another car company. And we have also been going through this pro-consumer, pro-employee time in the tech industry specifically. And this chart, as it's combined with Lewis's chart, the South Node, of course, is in this line of democracy, but it's connecting his Jupiter in gate 31. And his Jupiter is in a line that's labeled self-righteousness. And it's creating a channel of leadership for good or bad. Venus is conjunct the sun in this chart, the ruler of the South Node, and it's in a line labeled overreach. And Pluto in gate 46 creates the channel of discovery. So pushing upwards and being discovered out of obscurity. He did get a Supreme Court seat after this memo was written, and it's still impacting us today. Saturn, the ruler of the North Node in this chart, is in gate 16, and it's in a line that expresses fantasy as fact. And it's connecting with Uranus in gate 48 in the lines of degeneracy and insignificance to make the channel of talent. So if you follow, Jupiter is in gate 14, line 4. They're building a foundation for security by applying their talents to propaganda so they don't fade away from what they think is degeneracy and insignificance. Now we get to Paul Weyrich, who was one of the founders of the Heritage Foundation. He was born on October 7th, 1942. He was an American conservative political activist and commentator associated with the New Right. He co-founded the Heritage Foundation, the Free Congress Foundation, and the American Legislative Exchange Council, and he coined the term moral majority, co-founding an organization of the same name in 1979 with Jerry Falwell. He was also a Melkite Catholic deacon. He had some rather shady connections. His right-hand man in one of his groups was this guy, Laszlo Pastor, a former leader of the pro-Nazi Arrow Cross Party in Hungary, which had collaborated with Hitler's Third Reich. He was instrumental in establishing the ethnic outreach arm of the Republican National Committee. So when people talk about this connection of Nazism with the far right, it's not just from nothing. It's not just from imaginings. It's born out of something very real. He was born as a 5-1 on the Cross of Endeavor. Now, this is a very powerful cross, especially with his design. It's about action, the natural urge to apply energy to action, a taste for action. He created the Heritage Foundation during his first Saturn return. He's a very powerful manifesting generator with lots of tribal and logical sharing energy. He has the channel of talent. Mars is next to his sun in gate 48. So this guy was very busy during his life. He created a lot of organizations, but he also died very young at age 66. He has the channel of transformation. This is the channel of ambition. And he has one lines here. Mercury is in a line of conservation, and his Earth is in a line about influence through secret relationships. He has the channel of the Alpha with Pluto in gate 31. This is generational throat power. Both my mom and my dad had their Plutos here too. So this is about leadership for good or bad. He also has the channel of mating, which is what it sounds like. These people are going to propagate our species. Most of them, it depends on the lines. But my dad also had this channel and he had 9 kids. Now, even if he's not a 4-6 profile, his nodes are in 4-6 lines. And his north node is on the brotherhood, sisterhood line of gate 59. And this is about dropping barriers to establish a universal union. He has Saturn in gate 35, where Jupiter has been transiting recently. And as I mentioned before, Neptune, Saturn, and the North Node has been transiting in the opposite gate. So we're seeing all of these themes play out because this is the time for them. This is the energy for this moment. So now we get to the Heritage Foundation. It was founded in response to the Powell Memorandum and on Paul's first Saturn return, like I said. Founded in 1973, it took a leading role in the conservative movement of the 1980s during the presidency of Ronald Reagan, whose policies were taken from Heritage Foundation studies, including its mandate for leadership. The Heritage Foundation has had a significant influence in U.S. public policy making and has historically been ranked among the most influential public policy organizations in the United States. Heritage leads the 2025 Presidential Transition Project, also known as Project 2025, an extensive plan that includes appointing ideologically aligned civil servants, restricting abortion access, opposing LGBTQ+ rights, transforming federal agencies for political purposes, and imposing strict immigration policies. The New York Times reported the Heritage Foundation posted misinformation about the 2024 U.S. election and crafted fake videos claiming that non-citizens would rig the election. The Heritage Foundation was found on the 4-6 profile cross of contagion. Remember, this is his nodes. His cross is about spreading information that can infect others, giving them a virus, and not the woke kind. This chart's personality sun is hanging off of an open solar plexus, which you can't see here because it's combined with his chart. And it's the gate of the fates, it's called. It depends on gate 41 to activate its purpose, which is where Pluto has just been transiting. It's creating the channel of recognition. This cross and the cross of the Powell referendum is very similar. It's in different lines and different quarters, but it is connected. You see how it also carries the theme of gate 13, line 2, empathy for a select few. The chart's Venus is in this gate and line. It also has the channel of judgment, like Elon's chart and like Lewis's chart, seeing something that needs to be fixed in the world. Pluto is in gate 18, the gate of correction, in line 1, and it's in detriment in this line, which is described as the patriarch whose rigidity guarantees deterioration. Ross says about this line, think about this in terms of the law, because all laws begin this way. This is the beginning of what we call our moral codes. This is the line of Moses. This is the line of establishing the original code. This is the first law. It may be very primitive and needs to be refined. Uranus is in gate 32, fear for survival, and Jupiter is in gate 60, which is about conservatism. I also wanted to point out that his chart in combination with the Heritage Foundation creates this very powerful stream of logic, and why Heritage Foundation has lasted so long, even though it's got Pluto in that first line. I wanted to combine Heritage Foundation's chart with the publication chart of Project 2025, which actually published in 2022. And you see this connection between that logic channel stream that we saw with the combination of Paul's chart and Heritage Foundation's chart. And now we're seeing the abstract stream connect in this chart. So it speaks to the power that they have in actualizing their core objectives as much as they've ever been able to achieve before. They are now getting to experience what they've been planning for so many years. This will be their defining moment, and they will either survive or expire from this experience, I think. Now, Project 2025 was published on the 6-2 profile of the Cross of Wishes. Now, listen to this description. It's pretty wild. This is kind of a transpersonal impact over the other for their experience of the law. Everything about the law is the recognition that laws are created as a result of something. What's beautiful about the 3 is it wants to create laws for something that hasn't existed yet. So it's pushing into Star Trek territory. Go where no one else has gone before. All of that because one can see that as a 6-2, you get to see that laws don't necessarily apply. And you begin to ponder something. What you begin to ponder is if you change the cause, you will change the effect. It's the way it works. And so they begin to experiment with that. In other words, what they're ready to reveal to us is that there are greater laws. And the ultimate wish is a prayer. There are greater laws, the law of totality, the law of God, the laws that Jonathan wrote that he didn't know anything about. They are out there. Now you see this repetition of this theme. Design Saturn is in gate 13, line 2, restriction of empathy for a chosen few, with personality Saturn in gate 49 of revolution. In the 6th line, there is a restriction in its ability to expand its support for revolution, stubborn, often fatal rejectionism. Mercury is conjunct the North Node in gate 23, proselytization, the attempt to undermine one set of values for another. Because this was developed when Pluto was still in Capricorn, this may be Heritage Foundation's last hurrah as we go into an Aquarius cycle fully. This is Jerry Falwell, who is the co-founder of the Moral Majority. He was born on August 11th, 1933. We do have his exact time of birth, so this is his exact chart. His son, Jerry Falwell Jr., which you might remember from Trump's first administration, said it was his mom that pushed him into this strict moral lifestyle. He was actually a very permissive person who didn't judge people like his persona presented, which makes sense because he was born on a 6-3 profile on the Cross of Masks. This is what Ra says about this profile on this cross. If in fact duality is something that is truly an illusion, the fact that it's not possible to really bond with the other, but only to be able to survive it through masks, through administration, through all of these games, that ultimately there must be a formula for duality, a mystery that can be solved, because there is a doubt engendered, and the doubt engendered is, why are we this and that if we're not meant to be something else? What's the point? Jerry is a creative thinker. He has an individual knowing. He's a natural leader for good or bad. And he has a drive to bond and create a family or tribe around him. His potential weaknesses, or where he receives the most conditioning from others, are his undefined spleen, hanging on to what's not good for him, his undefined root, trying to rid himself of pressure, and his undefined ego, trying to prove himself. He has this personality Mars hanging off this undefined spleen in gate 32, line 1. Mars is an immature energy, and it speaks to the nature of his security themes and fears. He went through extremes of having a lot of wealth and then incurring a lot of debt. And he also became very overweight in his later years and died of heart failure. His pattern continues with a hanging gate 19 hanging off of this undefined root. His personality Saturn is here, where there's an overall restrictive energy in his fear of rejection that he tries to get rid of. His Saturn is in gate 13, opposing his personality Sun in Leo. So he has daddy issues. His father was a bootlegger and became an alcoholic after killing his brother. It's in line 4, so it restricts empathy based on fatigue. So if you think about his personal law or Jupiter, it's in gate 6 of conflict. So this can describe him blundering into conflict, and then Saturn can restrict sensitivity or empathy once he's done that. The moral majority began at a conference, and like I mentioned, it was in partnership with Paul Weyrich. Now, it was started on a 4-6 profile again, and it was on the cross of consciousness. It's a cross that is meant to condition consciousness of the collective. Again, there's a lot of Gemini energy with the sun in gate 35, and cycles repeat. This is a cycle we're in right now. As a collective, we've been experiencing this complete channel. The channel of transitoriness is called. Trump has this channel. And we've all been going through this experience together. It's also got the individual social channel with Mercury in gate 12, line 1. And the design Mercury is also in gate 17 of opinions. And it's creating this electromagnetic with his Pluto that's in gate 62 about detail. So it's creating this channel of acceptance, but also a very powerful communication of understanding. This moral majority was created connecting his north node in gate 31. He has his south node in gate 29, a line that is about overreach, biting off more than one can chew. And his north node is in gate 31, the gate of clinging fire. It's called the gate of fates. It's in the line of irony, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It creates this abstract channel of recognition that we talked about before. This chart has its design Venus in 41. It's about contraction. It's in line 3, which is about efficiency, selfishness in the times of decline. Pluto has just transited into this gate for everyone, hasn't transited to this line yet, but we're feeling this contraction in the world right now. So again, this chart is very apropos to the energy of this time. This chart also creates an electromagnetic with his design Venus in the gate of contribution. Uranus is here in a line that has the energy to attract attention. It forms a channel that creates the creative role model. And finally, Neptune is in gate 26, which also adds this power to attract attention. We've talked about this gate a lot, and this gate with Neptune there really attracts that spiritual energy. It was a very optimistic and huge time for the evangelical movement. I remember this time when I was little, my mom was deeply immersed into this church called the People's Church. Everybody was riled up and very excited. It was an electrifying time, but also you could describe it a little bit cultish. And it's very similar to the time that Neptune has been in Pisces because they're both mutable energies. And Neptune really thrives in mutable energies, Sagittarius and Pisces specifically. You've noticed that the first part of this cycle, it was very optimistic. And there's been a lot of spiritual movements, a lot of cultish types of movements, especially on social media during this time. Then there was Pat, the televangelist. Pat Robertson was born on the cross of the vessel of love. I have his profile as a 4-6 profile, but he could also be a 3-5 or a 3-6. And there's a slim possibility that he could have his moon in gate 50, which would make him a generator. But other than that, his chart doesn't change much. This is what Ra says about his cross. And it's important to pay attention to this because Neptune just transited to gate 25, and that's where his sun is. When we speak of the nature of love in terms of the vessel, we have these very basic formulas. The 10th gate is the potential to love oneself. The 15th gate is the potential to love humanity. The 46th gate is the potential to love the body. And the 25th gate is the potential of universal love. When you're looking at this transformation from the crisis of life on the plane and the cold aesthetic burden of what appears to be pointless of so much of life that's witnessed on this plane, the first transition is not to personal love. The only real movement is towards universal love. Remember that the 25 is the coolest of all loves. You're never going to meet a cooler love than 25. It's cool. The best way to understand that coolness is that I love my guitar as much as I'll ever love you. The biggest business priests had for thousands and thousands of years was to sell you amulets that they blessed so you would have good luck from it. This will protect you so it will not get you. It will get you if you don't wear this. People are hanging crosses, bear's teeth, ears, anything. You need this. Good luck from it. People who had no religious belief whatsoever were wearing all kinds of things. One day, my mother comes home with a copper bracelet. I said, "What's that?" She said, "It's going to protect me from arthritis." Good luck. Hope it works. How do you think the priesthood works? Religion has always been based on giving you luck against it. That's all it's ever been based on. It's always a con job, and yet a necessary one, because it's very hard to get to spirituality unless you recognize that. His cross is in an undefined G center, so his life theme is centered around looking for love and direction. He cannot fulfill his life without the other. He's meant to be conditioned by those around him. The great story that illustrates how his purpose is based on the conditioning from the other is the one which led him into the ministry in the first place. So he was following after his father's footsteps, but once he couldn't pass the New York City bar exam, he became a born-again Christian while having dinner at a restaurant in Philadelphia with author and World War II veteran Cornelius Vanderbregen. After his conversion, Robertson left the corporate world and went into ministry. Design Saturn sits next to his design sun in gate 10, which is about behavior. It not only speaks to his controversial comments regarding the sins of ACLU and gay rights and feminists bringing about disasters like 9/11, but it also speaks to his relationship with his father, who was a conservative Democratic senator who voted against civil rights. He's also someone who just naturally struggles for a purpose in his life. His south node is in gate 28, connected with his personality Saturn in gate 38, to create this channel of struggle. He struggles with this idea of making alliances with the devil and transgressing normal codes of behavior. The ruler of his south node, Mars, is in gate 55, hanging off of an undefined solar plexus. He is driven towards spiritual growth, but he wants the feel-good spiritual growth, and sometimes he looks to be provoked into it by shaking hands with the devil. You'll see in the next chart that when his book was published, the gate of provocation was defined, completing this emoting channel. And so it had this entire stream of individuality defined. The ruler of his north node, Venus, hangs off of an undefined ego in gate 21, the gate of control, with personality Uranus also there. He feels powerless to control these superior forces who he thinks are in charge of the material process. But he will rebel with severity if there is persistent interference in his need to move toward self-sufficiency, which is his north node. You'll see in a minute that Mercury was in this gate when his book was published. So he's speaking about this in this book. Now, Pat has a lot of open centers in his chart, which means the way he responds to life can be highly conditioned by the others in his environment. Lewis Powell was a splenic projector, like this chart shows that Pat could be. And Lewis Powell was defined by that judgment channel. He was a judge. And Pat's defined by this struggle channel. So if he is a splenic projector, the struggle is very important to his life. Now we finally get to the New World Order, which was first published on March 17th, 1992. Now I want to point out that both the Left Behind series and this New World Order book was published when Neptune and Uranus were conjunct in Capricorn. This conjunction only happens every 168 years, and it announces a new cycle. Richard Tarnas describes it like this: Uranus's Promethean impulse towards creative experimentation and innovation, freedom, rebellion against the status quo, and a vector towards the future, all complexly interacting with Neptune's idealism and hope, spiritual inspiration, intuitive vision, the dissolving of conventional boundaries and structures, and the imagination of a perfect harmony and unity to be realized in the human community. I also wanted to point out that Uranus and Neptune will meet for the first time in an aspect, a sextile, since this conjunction. So this is part of the reason why we're having all of this disruption right now, because there's part of our country that sees this new vision, that wants to put this new vision into place. Now, what their ideal vision is might not look exactly like they want it to look. It might look very different. It might not look like we want it to look. Or it might look like we want it to look. We just don't know. But right now, we're experiencing all the pain of this change as some of us are idealizing this vision that started during this time. Now, sometimes what's put out, like this book, is kind of a nasty picture. And you're like, oh, well, that's not very idealistic. But I think the energy that this book was putting out was like, this is the wrong way to go. And I think we should go this way. But Robertson's book was described as a catch-all for conspiracy theories by the Christian academic Dan Wilkie. A summary of Robertson's book is found on page 177, in which Pat says, a conspiracy has existed in the world working through Freemasonry and a secret order of the Illuminati, a group combining Masons and Jewish bankers. Historian Rick Perlstein told the Washington Post's Greg Sargent, the idea that God's law triumphs man's law absolutely saturates Robertson's world. Along with Falwell, he's most responsible for turning Christianity into Christian nationalism and Christian nationalism into insurrection. The New World Order's chart is on a 6-2 profile of the cross of the plane. And this is what Ross says about this cross. This is life on Mother Earth. Tough, heavy, dirty, mean, and nasty. That's exactly what this book sounds like. I haven't read it, but it sounds like it. And I wanted to point out very clearly that the sun in this chart is in gate 36, line 6, and it's something that we've been experiencing as a collective lately. And so you can kind of recognize this energy. It's mean, dirty, and nasty right now. And this is the transition time before we go into something new, hopefully more optimistic soon, but we'll see. Because Neptune in Aries does introduce some conflict. So you'll notice in this chart that the ego is still undefined, but it adds additional energy to this undefined ego, which says something. So the moon and Jupiter in gate 40 are in lines 5 and 2, which speak to deliverance through rigidity and resoluteness. And like I mentioned in his last chart, Mercury is in gate 21, line 2, which connects to his Uranus, describing a legitimacy of using force as a means to control where there is flagrant interference. So with this book, it looks like he's trying to prove something. If he's a projector, it sounds bitter. He's got a undefined throat still, trying to attract attention. And you have the entire emoting channel with Venus now in gate 55 and the design south node in gate 39. So he's trying to provoke the emotions, the spirit for growth. And Mars is in gate 49, line 4, which suggests using a platform of revolution to take advantage of the needs of society. We finally get to the man behind the scenes, Peter Thiel. He was much more public in Trump's first administration. He's been more behind the scenes during this administration, but he's definitely an architect. He was born in Frankfurt, Germany on October 11th, 1967, and his family emigrated to the United States when Peter was just 1 year old. His family lived in Cleveland, Ohio, where his father worked as a chemical engineer. His father worked for various mining companies, which meant he moved around a lot when he was a toddler. Now, when I found out this piece of information, it explained a lot about who he was, because what happens to us when we're that young is part of forming who we are today. It's a huge part. It says, before settling in Foster City, California, the Thiel family lived in South Africa, where Peter changed elementary schools 7 times. He attended a school that required students to wear uniforms and utilized corporal punishment, such as striking students' hands with a ruler. He said this experience instilled a distaste for uniformity and regimentation, later reflected in his support for individualism and libertarianism. Now, his understanding of who he is interesting, and I find this a lot in the discourse around libertarianism, especially far-right libertarianism, because what it seems like happens to these people is that they want freedom, but the ways that they access freedom is to control other people. And you see this dichotomy in Peter's chart where it's like he's naturally attracted to this control mechanism and repelled by it at the same time, which is what I think happens in far right extremism. They're like, okay, well, if I control everybody around me, I can live in my own free world because everybody else is coming along with my vision. I think that's how everybody thinks. If everybody else comes along with my vision, I can live freely. My company can be free from regulations, but everybody else has to conform to me. So let's talk about Peter Thiel's human design chart. Now, I want to point out that we do not know Peter's time of birth. So he could be a 2-5 or a 3-6 profile rather than a 3-5 profile. And he might not have this channel of mutation, which is the 360, which defines his root. His root might be open if his moon moved. It might be before the gate 60, which would be gate 61, Capricorn moon, or he might have his moon in later Aquarius, which would mean his moon is in gate 41, which is where Pluto is right now, which is very interesting. But if he was born during this time, he would have that individual mutative channel. Otherwise, his chart accurately describes him from the day he was born. Peter Thiel was born on the cross of penetration. This is what Ra says about this cross. The cross of penetration is just that. It breaks the surface. What follows penetration is a clarion. That's what penetration does. Penetration opens the earth, and the clarion plants the seed. But the earth has to be broken first. To be a penetrator is to have a very, very difficult process. You are never allowed to be deep. This is not the well. This is intuition at its most precise, on the surface, momentary and weak. Remember that it's not a powerful breeze that makes you sick. It's a very weak one because it sneaks up on you. It is intuitive. Basically, what that says is you've got an incredible warning system. acuteness. You can hear what nobody else can hear. You can hear the breath of God. The perfected intelligence where clarity eliminates doubt and ensures manifestation. The possibility of perfected intuition. You see, he has the same open G center, which looks very similar to Donald Trump's open G center with the hanging gate 33. But he has his hanging gate off of an undefined throat. His Jupiter is in a line that talks about privacy as a way to success. So different than Trump's because he's not going to be front and center, but he's able to adapt to many different identities. So his message, when it gets out, is very powerful because people project onto him very similarly to Donald Trump. Peter is very tribally oriented, got a powerful ego with his personality Mars in gate 26, joining Mercury in gate 44 to create the channel of surrender. This channel is often referred to as the ability to manipulate the tribe. He has the intelligence to persuade and the drive to sell. Now, it's not as powerful as Donald's nodal configuration in gate 26 and 45, but it can be very sneaky in its ability to manipulate others to buy what he's selling. He also has two tribal channels of preservation and mating. He's focused on preserving, securing, nurturing, and propagating the tribal structure. You see that he has the same nodes as Pat Robertson did with his design south node in gate 28, line 2, and his design north node in gate 27, line 2. But he doesn't have the same struggle with it as Pat did, because he doesn't have that gate of struggle connecting with his south node in the gate of risk. So his environmental trajectory themes moves from taking risks by shaking hands with the devil or making unsavory alliances to focusing more on nurturing self-sufficiency. He does it with much more ease than Pat did. And then his personality nodes take him from a perspective that is a determined focus to face adversity responsibly to an unrestrained growth for new beginnings. So this is what I was talking about with this desire to control so other people don't control you. If his privacy is impeded upon, he will attempt to control others. He has his design Saturn in gate 21, which is about control, and his design Jupiter is in gate 33, which is about privacy. And then he has his personality Jupiter in gate 29, which is about overreach, biting off more than you can chew. And so he attempts to control others so that he can be on top of the hierarchy so they don't control him. So he can bite off more than he can chew. So he can do things that he wants to do without constraint. It's very intelligent, but he can sometimes misjudge the strength of his competition. And that's where he can get into a lot of trouble. Well, that was an epic journey, but I learned a lot. I hope you did too. So I hope you join me for our next analysis of Trump and Putin's chart. Till then, see you later.